So welcome back, Council colleagues. Of course, we were meeting in closed prior to this. This is North Grenville's Municipal Council meeting for Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021. We're pleased to be back in the building. Thank you to Council colleagues for all wearing your poppies, and of course staff. I was pleased on Sunday to join Jay Tusaw, who's leading the Poppy campaign, and we were able to launch, obviously, commemorations for November 11th, and in particular the Poppy campaign. And I understand the Canadian Tire is going to play a special role in providing a site for people to drive by and contribute to the Poppy campaign and make sure that they collect a poppy to wear. So excellent to see that the Poppy campaigns continue even in these COVID times. And we look forward to hearing more from the Legion on what I know will be a fairly contained ceremony, not like obviously pre-COVID times, but something that will still mark the day as it deserves to be marked. Apart from that, it's my pleasure this evening to welcome a delegation from the Kemptville District Hospital, and that is the first order of business, unless, of course, Clerk, I should do disclosures of interest. Have we done those yet, or are we good to go straight to KDH?
If you could do disclosures of interest. I can't recall if we did them under close, so yes, please.
Okay, so I'll look for any disclosures of interest in regards to items on the agenda this evening. Seeing none, we approved the agenda earlier, so I think we can go straight to the delegation. And I'd like to welcome two senior representatives from KDH, and I'll have Mr. Vasello introduce his colleague, but I think Mr. Vasello, you're going to go first.
Thank you very much, Mayor Peckford, and thank you to the councillors, staff, and guests for being here tonight. It's an important evening for us as we explain a little bit of detail about our CT scan project, our initiative, and why we believe it's the best thing for not only Kemptville District Hospital but the municipality of North Grenville. There's a lot of material in the slides we're not going to go over verbatim. They're there for your reference, after the meeting or perhaps tomorrow, and I'd be more than happy, along with Dr. Santongo, to answer questions. But in a nutshell, since we started our work at Kemptville District Hospital, building capacity for our community, we really decided to build with purpose, and we wanted to have smart growth. And when we looked at our infrastructure 6 years ago, we realized we needed more of it to supply the services to the community, hence the development of our clinics. We expanded our clinics eightfold over the last several years, and you folks know that because our clinics are very well used by the community. This is another brick in the foundation, if you will. It is infrastructure. Diagnostic imaging is very important. CT scanning is the standard of care today. And I would venture a proposal that in 10 years, all small hospitals who offer 24/7 emergency services and inpatient or outpatient surgical services in clinics would have a CT scan. That's how important it is. That's how mission critical it is for organizations who want to remain relevant and viable in the acute care space. We're no different than that. The project in a nutshell, and I'll only spend another minute before I turn it over to Dr. Santongo to talk about need, is it's a $4 million project. It's divvied up into two equal parts, $2 million for the CT scan and related equipment. And since we don't have the physical space at Kemptville District Hospital, we have another $2 million allocated for the bricks and mortar component. It is the bricks and mortar component that we're seeking assistance from the not only the municipality of North Grenville, but the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville. Our foundation has committed to start a capital campaign for the equipment funds, and that'll be starting, we're not sure when, but in several months down the road once we get an official start. We do have a proposal ready for submission to the ministry for our application. That'll be sent in tomorrow afternoon, and we're optimistic that it'll be very well received. And the need in that proposal is very well documented as it's highlighted here in the deck. I don't believe I could speak more eloquently than Dr. Santongo in terms of the need. And rather than a lot of need statements, Dr. Santongo, being a practicing anesthetist, spends a lot of time in the OR, plus he's an emergency room physician on top of his many clinical gifts and skills. And he's going to be now speaking to you a little bit more about the need, and I'll finish up a little bit at the end with the actual ask slide. So thank you.
Okay, is this thing working? Okay. Do you want to handle the deck? Thanks, Frank. You very generous introduction. And I'm Dr. Colin Santongo. I'm the current Chief of Staff over at Kemptville District Hospital. And I'd like to start by thanking you all for agreeing to let me present specifically about the clinical argument for a CT scan in our region. Initially, I thought I'd present a whole bunch of data, and then I changed my mind later on because I felt like a stronger argument for getting this CT scan would be to give you a clinical situation or a typical scenario that we typically would face in the emergency room. So just to give you a bit of a background, currently at the hospital, we have two imaging modalities, specifically an X-ray and an ultrasound, and that's what we rely on for imaging purposes at this stage. But frankly, in this day and age, these modalities are basically considered inadequate. The simple fact is that CT scans are considered the gold standard right now if one considers oneself an emergency room. And frankly, KDH is currently not meeting that standard. I constantly get feedback from the emerge docs when they transfer patients and they're speaking to tertiary care institutions, and the response from those institutions are fairly incredulous and surprised that we don't actually have a CT scan and that we're running a 24/7 emergency room in addition to a surgical program without one. So from their perspective, it seems to be a standard or an expectation that you'd have one at the least. So in the next couple of minutes, I think I've got like 6 or 7 minutes to do this talk, I really would like to convince you that it's a worthwhile modality for us to attain. So I'll start off with a little story. There's Ethel. She's a grandmother. She's around 75 years old. And one day she wakes up in the morning and she has belly pain. And she convinces her son, Dave, to take her to the Kemptville emergency room to seek some care. While she's in the emergency room, she meets a physician. She meets Dr. Vasallo. And Dr. Vasallo examines her and finds out that she's tender in her lower abdomen, and she also has a fever in addition to her symptoms. So he does the most prudent thing and basically orders an ultrasound. The ultrasound report comes back later and says that there's a possibility that Ethel has an appendicitis. Now, it says possibility that she has an appendicitis. The reason, I've got to give you a bit of a background about the use of ultrasounds in this day and age, is that it's what's called a user-dependent modality. What that means is that it is totally dependent on the skill set of the user, and it also depends on the body habitus of the patient. If you've got a patient who's got a fairly extensive amount of, let's say, adipose tissue, it's fairly difficult to get a definitive diagnosis. So Dr. Vasallo gets these results. He gets possibility of an appendicitis in Ethel, and he noticed she's also got a fever. So he does his part, and he picks up the phone because he knows that he needs a CT scanner. Because the reality is that most surgeons in this day and age will not take a patient to the operating room unless they have a CT scan, because they realize that the ultrasound itself is not a reliable modality. So he picks up the phone and calls the Queensway Carleton Hospital to get a CT scan. He picks up the phone and speaks to the radiologist. The radiologist is busy, takes maybe about 30, 40 minutes to come to the phone. He eventually comes to the phone, and Dr. Vasallo convinces him that this patient needs a CT scan. So he says, fine, we'll set you up with a CT scan, but you need to speak to the surgeon. And so Dr. Vasallo puts the phone down, calls the surgeon. Usually takes about an hour because the surgeons are usually busy doing in the operating room. So that's another hour out of Dr. Vassallo time waiting to try and get the CT scan done. Surgeon finally picks up the phone and says, "Okay, Dr. Vassallo, you can get this. I think it's a reasonable thing to get a CT scan." And Dr. Vassallo says, "Okay," and the surgeon says, "But one more thing, you need to call the emergency doc at the Queensway to agree to the transfer." And so Dr. Vassallo puts the phone down, and this is the third phone call he had to make. And he's had to tell this story 3 times in order to get the CT scan done at the Queensway Carleton. So he speaks to the emerge doc at the Queensway Carleton, and that emerge doc says, "Sure, send the patient over, but you need to have a nurse come with the patient." And Dr. Vassallo says, "Okay, well, that's reasonable." And he checks on Ethel, and he finds that Ethel is getting a bit sicker. So he calls for the ambulance and puts Ethel in the back of an ambulance, but figures, I probably need to come with Ethel on this transfer because she's a little bit sick. So here we go. We have a nurse in the back of an ambulance. We have an emerge doc in the back of an ambulance. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with how the system works at KDH. We usually have 1 emerge doc, or at the most 2, on a shift at that time. So if 1 emerge doc is taken away in the back of an ambulance, we got to call another emerge doc in, and sometimes that's not always possible. So we have 2 medical staff who are escorting this patient in an ambulance that has been taken out of operation. In terms of the ambulance could have been somewhere else dealing with other emergencies. And so finally Ethel arrives at the Queensway Carleton Hospital to get her CT scan. But there's a backup in the Queensway Carleton Hospital, and Ethel's in the hallway for a couple of hours waiting to get evaluated by the emerge doc at Queensway Carleton. So she waits a couple of hours for that, and she finally gets her CT scan. And then they say, "Yes, you certainly have an appendicitis. But we've got to wait about an hour or so. The surgeon is still doing something else, and we'll try and get you in the operating room. Oh, by the way, we have to call the operating room team in to, because it's kind of late at night by this stage, in order to get your appendix taken out." So all in all, and I forgot to mention that Dave, her son, had to take time off work in order to accompany Ethel to the emergency room at the Queensway Carleton. So all in all, it's taken about 8 to 10 hours for Ethel to get to the operating room to get her appendix taken out. Some of you may think that this is an extreme example, but that's not the case. The reality is it happens, and it's not a one-off. So eventually, Ethel does get her appendix taken out. And what has this resulted in? It's resulted in longer wait times, because all of a sudden you've taken a nurse out of the emergency room. You may have taken an emergency doc out of the emergency room. It's resulted in Dave having to take time off work to come to Queensway in order to get that CT scan done, and probably taken possibly a significant loss of income on his part. It's taken an ambulance out of the system. And I think those are sort of the main sort of factors that have resulted. And the most important thing that I almost forgot is that it has delayed the definitive treatment for Ethel in terms of her receiving definitive care. Now, what is the alternative? The alternative is that she could have received her CT scan in Kempville as soon as she walked through the door. It would have taken an hour to get that CT scan done. We could have called ahead to the hospital involved. We don't do emergency surgeries in Kempville, and she could have got her appendix taken out in an hour or 2. from her initial presentation at the Kemptville Hospital. So, as I said, this is not a one-off or an extreme example. This is a scenario that we face multiple times if you're working in the emergency room. So I picked out one example, but there's an extensive list of things, life-threatening conditions that require access to a CT scan in order to provide definitive care for patients. I'll go through a quick list. Any patient who's suspected to have a stroke needs a CT scan. If you have a significant neck injury, you need a CT scan. X-rays are notoriously unreliable for diagnosing neck fractures. Any patient who is above the age of 65 and is on a blood thinner and hits their head needs a CT scan. Closer to home, we do what's called total joint replacements. And one of the most common complications of joint replacements can be something called a pulmonary embolus, which is a clot in the lungs. Any patient who is discharged from the joint program and has shortness of breath 2-3 days later will need a CT scan. I also was thinking about the changes that will be coming to our communities in the next couple of years in terms of a new jail that may possibly come, or an aging population with nursing homes popping up here and there, where certainly head trauma and elderly falling and hitting their heads are going to be a major issue. And certainly time is essential when it comes to brain injuries, and especially when it comes to bleeds. So I've spoken a lot about sort of the emergency room aspect and the need for a CT scan in the emergency room, but the need extends to other departments too. We currently have a pretty decent surgical program, but one of the limitations that we've encountered in terms of expanding that program is dealing with post-surgical complications, especially dealing with bowel surgeries. Surgeons are reluctant to come to hospitals that don't have scanners readily available should they have a complication in the operating room. And so a lot of surgeons have been reluctant to come to Kemptville just for that particular reason. We currently have a pretty significant spine program where we do micro discectomies for herniated discs and so forth. Certainly expanding that program where patients could get their imaging done here in Kemptville instead of having to go to Ottawa to get that imaging done, and they could get their surgery done at the same location that they've had their imaging done. In terms of our inpatient services, while the majority of our patients are sort of non-cancer, there is a significant portion of patients who are admitted for cancer. And part of the treatment for cancer requires monitoring, surveillance, staging. All that requires transfers to Ottawa. And a cancer patient who's going through a fragile time in their lives should not be going back and forth to Ottawa in order to get their staging done. In terms of, I'll sort of end there, in terms of sort of the community and family doctors need, I guess. Family doctors are dealing with lots of chronic conditions, whether it's chronic abdominal pain or chronic back pain or certainly cancer. And having that imaging modality close to home certainly will allow patients to have their care at home instead of traveling back and forth. The last part is to do with recruitment. We get a lot of young residents and medical students coming to our hospital. A lot of them trained at tertiary centers that do have this imaging modality as a basic, as a standard over there, and seem very surprised when they come to Kemptville and do not have that readily available. In terms of recruiting physicians, we have physicians who come and work in our emergency room who are used to having that modality readily available, and certainly it does make our recruitment efforts harder, trying to convince a doc to rely only on X-ray and ultrasound in order to make a diagnosis. And the last part of recruitment is that in order for us to have an on-site radiologist in place at the hospital, a CT scan is a must. Radiologists are not going to set up shop in any community unless there's a CT scan available. And that's my talk, and I'm certainly open to any questions. Or did you want to continue, Frank?
It's a mayor's prerogative whether you want to take questions for Dr. Santiago in his section, or would you want to save them to the end?
Yeah, why don't you finish with the presentation, and then we'll take questions.
Great, thank you, Mayor, for that. So thank you, Colin, for that very colorful clinical picture. I think the folks in the room tonight they have a better sense of the clinical need, not only from the provider's perspective, but the important services offered to patients and families. I don't need to tell you folks that we always strive to punch above our weight. Dr. Santiago mentioned spinal surgery. Sounds like a run-of-the-mill surgical program. We're the only small hospital, not only in Eastern Ontario, but in Ontario doing spinal surgery, both the neurological and orthopedic component of it. We're very proud of that. We want to continue to be viable and relevant, not only for this community, but for our providers as well. We need to provide them the tools in which to do their job safely and deliver high-quality care that they've been delivering all along. We need to support them even more. We have a catchment area, I did put this up on the screen just to remind folks, not to remind myself how large it is. This is a ministry-designated catchment area. And to the northern boundary, it's really South Barhaven to the north of Prescott in the south. It goes to the western border of Winchester, in the east, and of course it goes the eastern border of Merrickville in the west. So it's a large diamond-shaped area. This is more circular, but it's more diamond-shaped. A lot of folks in there. And if you look at the catchment area proper, there's not one CT scan in that entire area. They do get CT services, people in our catchment area, but they get them elsewhere. And that's not care closer to home, and we're not providing it in our hospital. And it is, again, we mentioned this a few times, it is the standard of care. We need to invest in a CT scan to remain viable and relevant. And it's mission critical. I won't say anything more about that. If you look at, and I know we're a little bit over time, and there is some material there that I'll left you. And this is just a schematic. A lot of folks did ask questions early in the process. Why can't we use one of our rooms we currently have in our diagnostic imaging department for the CT scan? But the suite is much larger than you would imagine, not only for the modality, and I believe Doreen would know this from her previous work. It's about triple the size of a normal DI space because you need prep rooms, you need a lot more lead in the walls, you need a waiting area, and you also need a larger control room, hence the need for a new footprint. And this is essentially what we're asking for support from you folks tonight. I want to cut to the chase on my last slide. Thank you for your patience. What we're proposing tonight, and we want to show you the entire $4 million project. You'll see the portion that's down at the bottom, which is the $2 million we're going to rely on our foundation to raise. We're putting in $200,000 at the very top, and that middle portion is the $1.8 million that is left unfunded, at least on paper, and we're proposing a 50-50 split of that $1.8 million between the municipality of North Grenville and the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville. That's what we're proposing, $900,000, and that could be paid out, of course, over a long period of time, 10 years. And Of course, the start of the project is not going to happen tomorrow, so we have some flexibility on the start of the flow of funds if we're so fortunate to get your support this evening. And of course, the bottom part is not trivial. I want to point that out. We have to find, unless the ministry magically increases our operating budget, we need to find room in our current budget of $700,000 approximately per year to operate the CT scan. We believe we've done our homework and we have that money, and keep in mind we do get fees, technical fees to augment that, and we're not paying, because now when we send a patient, I'm not sure if you know this, we send a patient out for a CT scan, we have to pay for that, or an MRI, we have to pay for that. And we also pay for the transfer, which is very important as well, because not only is it the ambulance that's taken off the road to transfer a patient to those hospitals that have a CT scan, invariably a nurse would have to go with that patient, and in a rare occasion, Dr. Santongo, a physician would go, but it's mainly a nurse. But I do want to emphasize that ambulance is taken off the roads, and we don't have a lot of ambulance coverage now, so that's an important factor that we want to cover off. I believe, you know, between the presentations we both made this evening and the information you have in your deck, and of course we'd be more than happy to answer questions this evening and subsequent to this meeting to meet your information needs. So I'll end there, Mayor. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I appreciate it, both in terms of painting the picture of what happens when there isn't a CT scanner in your hospital, and also some of the kind of regional realities. I'm just going to ask a question, and then I'll open it up to council colleagues, of course. You describe a catchment area of 259,000, for which there is not a single CT scanner in the area. Of course, you know, certainly neighboring municipalities might say, well, you know, we head to Winchester, we head to Brockville, I assume Smith Falls may have one as well. So can you just describe who's in this catchment area? What portion would be United Counties? What portion would be other counties or the city of Ottawa? How does it break down?
Well, the United Counties, you folks might be more familiar with the map of the United Counties, but North Grenville is part of that group. Yep. And North Grenville goes north, not quite as far as Barrhaven, but it goes north of the river. And it also goes south towards Prescott, and it also has an east-west border, so that would be in that area.
So it would go all the way to Prescott, is that correct? Okay.
Exactly.
And then to Merrickville, of course.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Now that's our catchment area proper. I made reference, Mayor, that's a ministry designated catchment area. We get a lot of patients in our emerge. We get a lot of patients in our clinics. We're just amazed at how many people come from Cornwall, come from other jurisdictions within the United Counties. They do come to our area, and we trace those by postal code. And we're pleased to offer service to them. They would be seeking service at KDH relative to CT scan, with the exception of, now this is just forecasting, the Brockville contingent would receive the CT scans in the Brockville General, and also the Gananoque group would receive their CT scans from the Kingston group. But we believe we'll get a draw of the other folks coming into our hospital for the referred in CT scans, as well as the folks that will be coming to our emerge from those jurisdictions seeking emerge care. And some of that emerge care would need a CT scan as part of the diagnosis.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And one more question, certainly in conversations with other mayors of neighboring municipalities, some have signaled that KDH would be competing with Brockville, right, with Winchester, in terms of CT scan activity, that somehow by adding a CT scanner, we would be taking away from volumes at other hospitals. And I wonder if you could speak to that, because I know that's something that's on the minds of, certainly not me as a mayor, given the fact that I've had the benefit of discussing that with you, but just for others.
No, Mayor, thanks for the question. I'll answer that. You know, it's the opposite, quite frankly. We have need in our community, the larger community of Eastern Ontario. It'll take us 2, if not 3 years backlog. There's a lot more need out there than supply. So no, we wouldn't be competing with those other hospitals for sure.
And once the backlog was addressed over those 2 to 3 years, how would you describe KDH's role in having a CT scanner in this area? Is it to avoid further backlog? What
Well,
would you-
avoid further backlog, but there's a couple of factors, and this is a very good question, by the way, thank you. There's a couple of factors at play. It's going to be the growth of our community, and you folks know more than anybody, our community is growing like crazy. The surgical and clinical services that we're bringing into Kentville will also drive those volumes. We have a great relationship with the Ottawa Hospital in Brockville. We'll be doing joint programming. I don't believe we're going to be an island. Hospitals will have to collaborate and partner, and we'll be doing work with them, getting some of their surgeons to come and work at our hospital, not just from TOH. We have a great relationship with them, but Dr. Colin Santongo and other medical leadership folks at the hospital want to explore other opportunities. We're open for business. We want to leave all doors open with the main proviso. It has to add value to the citizens of North Grenville and our surrounding communities, and it has to provide a great support for our providers. It really is something, if you look at the patients and families and the providers as two boats in the ocean, when the tide rises, we have to make sure that both of those entities rise equally. We can't have one without the other. So I believe the argument is to the opposite. We'll have lots of need. Now keep in mind, at the same time, over the last few years, there'll be more research, more diseases, more conditions requiring a more sensitive diagnostic tool like a CT scan would provide, and that's also going up. It's not going down and it's not flatlining. So there's a lot of drivers that would not only support ourselves for a CT scan, I would argue very strongly some of our hospital colleagues would have an equally strong argument to get an additional CT scan for their catchment areas. That's how much the industry is advancing, and Dr. Santongo could add a bit more color if you like, but I'm very firm on that.
I mean, I don't really have much more to add from what Frank has said. I'm just struggling to sort of get my head around the whole sort of competing aspect of it, is that there is a significant need for having this modality to serve the community that we live in, as well as the region. And I personally feel that this need is long overdue. It's 4 or 5 years overdue, and so yeah. So that essentially is my focus in being able to provide the patients who come to our hospital with a level of care that they would expect at any other institution. Granted, there is a significant divide between the urban and rural environment in terms of level of cares, with access to specialists in urban environments, but certainly our goal is to close that divide as much as possible. And if we're to call ourselves a functioning emergency room, we should be able to have the modalities that go with that title.
Thank you, Colin. Just a bit more context, if I might, just to add on that, Doreen, before I take your question. Context is important. We're listed among 31 nations, the industrialized nations on this planet. We're ranked 26 of 31 in terms of CAT scanners per million of population. We're, as a nation, we're sitting at about 14.1 CAT scanners per million population. I would also look at, if you look at the Ontario numbers, we're even worse than that. We're at 11.9. So I can provide more data for you on that. But as a nation, we're woefully behind. And I believe this current government, Conservative government, is trying their best to narrow that gap. And we need to do better in Canada. We need to do better in Ontario. And I would argue we need to do better here in North Grenville. I'll end there. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to recognize Councillor O'Sullivan and then Councillor Strachan. I think you may wish to also speak, and then I'll go to the other side of the house. So Councillor O'Sullivan first, please.
Thank you. Thank you for that thorough presentation. You're kind of preaching to the choir over here, because I firmly believe that a CT scanner is necessary. I mean, you can't compare it. It's like dial-up internet versus broadband. And I mean, we're fighting for broadband here because it's a necessity in the 2021, and so is its CT scanners. So I thoroughly believe that, and I would probably guess that New Zealand has more CT scanners per population than we do, for sure. Because they only have 4 million people, and I'm sure they have way more than 11 CT scanners. I mean, certainly CT scanners are the state-of-the-art diagnostic now, and gone are the days of exploratory laparotomies just to find out what's going on inside. So I'm wondering if the money that would be saved, you know, in the scenario that you gave us, the money that would be saved by not having to send patients elsewhere for the CT scan, not just in the quality of care and appropriate care for the patient, but in the staffing costs, the ambulance costs, all of that, would cover the costs of the operating costs of the CT scanner. 700,000 a year, approximately, that you've estimated. So if the business case would talk about the cost of having the CT scanner right there available, would, instead of spending money sending patients elsewhere, would that balance out that 700,000? And what about the revenue that is generated from it? The professional component often, well, usually goes to the physicians, radiologists, et cetera, but, and oftentimes they share that in terms of professional development, training, et cetera, for other staff. And the technical component would go to the hospital, so to help cover some of the costs operating and the capital costs, yes? So does the government, provincial government, consider reduced length of stay, reduced cost, reduced repeat visits to emerge? Because if you get sent away because they can't really be sure what's wrong with you, and then you end up back there a couple of days later with the recurring pain that the analgesic that was given the first time has worn off and you're back because the pain's still there, then there's reduced costs to the medical system, reduced repeat visits to emerge, maybe reduced infection rates, et cetera, by prompt action. So I think there's a whole case for having a CT scanner on site, absolutely.
Oh, just your mic.
Thank you, my button controlled man. Thank you, thank you. I think I get used to this, wouldn't I? I want to be clear, it's on the operating side. We're raising capital for the machinery and the bricks and mortar, but and as the business case, as I mentioned earlier, is ready, we'll send that to the mayor for distribution. I think you should see that as well, because you need to understand all the line items in it with a lot more detail than I'm going to give this evening. But essentially, we're going to have to find some operating dollars, approximately of the 700,000, about 225 within our current operations. And I believe our CFO has done a really good job with our clinical team and our corporate services team to find those efficiencies. But I have to also stress, this is an investment we need to make as a hospital, as a province. It's not all about cost savings. This is about advancing the state of care for our patients and family members and the support of our providers. It's cost of doing business. This is the next level. And when you go up to that next level, you need to consider an investment. And this is an investment that we wanted to make. We wanted to expand our clinics. That wasn't a trivial exercise. That was a $2.1 million investment we needed to make in order to get the clinic infrastructure. If you folks saw what we had before we opened up our clinics, we didn't recognize it. It's just another world apart. Similarly, we're doing with our information system, our hospital information system. We're investing in a significant upgrade to a more robust hospital information system in Epic with our hospital partners in the area. Winchester's one of them, along with TOH and Deep River in this round of implementation. So we're happy to do that, but it really is keeping pace. I'm charged by our board to have that pace being met. I would not be doing my job if I fell asleep at the switch and did not consider the necessary strategic infrastructure pieces that need to be in place in order to achieve what we want to achieve as an organization. And we're constantly striving for excellence, and it's all part of that.
Well, I think you're doing a great job. I know your accreditation is exemplary, and your infection rates, surgical infection rates are very good. Your hand hygiene audits are very good. So you're really on the right track, and I think for quality and patient safety, a CT scanner is a must. So
Thank you.
I think that's...
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. I'll go to Councillor Strachan, and then I know we have another lengthy presentation, so we'll try to wrap up. Councillor Strachan.
So I don't have a lot in the way of questions. I think we've touched on this at the KDH board meetings in various forms. I think it's come up. And certainly the standard of care piece, I think, is not lost on this. And I appreciate the very detailed example of how each step has another impact, and that bit of snowball effect that happens when you have one key piece of equipment that's missing from your hospital. I've, I guess, fortunately or unfortunately, been able to have timely access to CT scans personally, so I can appreciate how stressful it can be when you don't have that, whether you're acutely ill or you have something that needs to be investigated. So I guess from a personal perspective, I see that benefit. The numbers that are showing, I think in one of the charts, I know you were trying to stay away from the data, but my science mind wants to look at all the numbers. And just looking at where the expectation is versus the actual, just looking in the Champlain Lynn and how many more scans they were doing above and beyond. And so I think showing what those numbers are, I think, is important as well, right? Because it's, as you say, it's not just our bubble, you know, it's everything around us, and how one shift can then alleviate some of the pressure in a lot of the other areas. So I think those numbers are very important. One of the points that Dr. Santango, I think you mentioned it not in the last meeting, but the one before, you talked about recruitment, and you touched on that and how important it is, and how we can't even, you can't attract others, you can't attract radiologists into the hospital if there's no CT scanner available. So it's again that a bit of that ripple effect that you have, right? So even just looking at having other folks with other specialties and medical care professionals as part of our hospital complement, you know, hinges on something like a CT scanner. I think that the municipality has invested in KDH previously. You know, it has been something that we budgeted in years past, actually not too long ago. I think we wrapped up our budget process for that. But you know, I think that when we look at it in the grand scheme of things, when we're trying to finance something as important as this, that it would be a worthwhile investment on our part over the years. Finally, I have all the confidence in the world, and the foundation as well, of being able to support the other parts to this large budget ask to support the equipment side of things as well. So I don't think that you know, we would get to the point where we'd be looking at the infrastructure only, and then we wouldn't have the equipment or anything like that. So I think the package deal is there. So no questions, but I just wanted to highlight those ones and to say that I appreciate this, and I think that it would be a worthwhile investment. And thank you very much for the information, the data, and the story.
Thank you, Councillor Strachan. Appreciate you acknowledging the great support you've given us in the past for redevelopment, and I got to say, as of lately, the great support that you folks have given us, not only council but staff, led by Mr. Dyke's leadership in getting our assessment center up and running, and the vaccination center. I think we're definitely the jewel in the region in terms of getting those vaccination rates as high. As you folks know, we're leading the province in that. So thank you for your support.
Okay, I'll acknowledge Deputy Mayor, and then we'll look to wrap it up. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. It was excellent. I think we all know that there's this need. Yeah, I don't think you had to really sell it to us. These things are important. Frank, you know, I sat on the foundation board for many, many years, raised lots of money, involved in lots of different projects that we're doing, and it's always a great need for sure. One question though that often comes to me when I was on the board especially, and it still does today, but occasionally people will bring it up, and I'll get you to kind of explain it how best you do, is that the hospitals are under the purview of the province, and you know, the funding comes from the province, and we know how that works, and I understand it. But the taxpayers are going to probably ask me, so this is $900,000, and if we did this in 1 year, that's about a 7% tax increase on the residents, so they wouldn't be too happy about that. And just so I tell the residents, we're not committing to anything today, and if we do it, it's going to be over a longer period of time. I just want to get that out of the way. But so if you could just kind of explain to the taxpayers why does a municipality, why does the county, why does any smaller, lower tier government have to step up and put out this kind of money? And why does a foundation have to go out and get money? We had that question in the past. If the province sees that there's a need here, and you even mentioned just briefly there that the new government, or the current government, is trying to close this gap. So anyway, so that's kind of a question that would come to somebody like me who's approving a tax increase or funding like this. And I've got another question after that.
Sure, I'll answer that question. Thank you, Councillor McManaman. It's a topic near and dear to my heart, and I'm working closely with the Ontario Hospital Association to get the idea of government needs to start investing in infrastructure, diagnostic imaging and IT. I'll leave IT alone for a second, or maybe this evening. But on the diagnostic imaging and other equipment side, it's considered infrastructure. The government funds, just to let everybody know this, it's about 90% of our budget. We need to go out and raise that capital ourselves for these much needed equipment. They're infrastructure pieces. The ministry is committed to investing in other forms of infrastructure. We have an application in every year, and we're so fortunate that Minister Steve Clark's been championing this on our behalf at Queen's Park for HERF funding. It stands for Hospital Infrastructure Renewal Funding, HERF. And that's for bricks and mortar. That's for something like windows, roof materials, boiler, elevators. I would argue that what we're talking about now is infrastructure, diagnostic imaging, and our IT systems. That's just as much infrastructure today as anything I just described a second ago. For example, almost every bit of technology we bring in has a digital component to it. Even some of the technology you're not probably familiar with. The beds we bring in are called smart beds. Our pumps are smart pumps. Whenever you hear the word smart, that means digital. That means it's a huge burden on our organization. So I agree with you about that gap. And yes, the government's doing a lot to narrow the gap in getting CT scans out into the spaces, but we need to have the government also fund some of these much needed infrastructure pieces like diagnostic imaging so that the foundations aren't overburdened, the ratepayers overburdened. But unfortunately, across Ontario, and I'd argue across this great nation of ours, that's the situation that we're in. And we have to rely on the great citizens, the great councils to assist us in raising money. We're trying to do our best to economize. But, the belts are tightened pretty tight now, and we can't get much more blood out of that stone, as they say. So I think you're going to hear a lot more of that right across the province, if not the country, that the provincial and federal governments have to do more to underwrite the cost of healthcare because it's expanding exponentially, and the funding is not keeping up with it.
Thank you for that. The other question I had was not technical, I guess, but the CT scan, I think they've been around for a long time. Is that the Cadillac, or is it the MRI, the Cadillac? And why wouldn't you get an MRI? But I kind of know the answer to that. I think it's a little more expensive, right?
Well, that's a great question. I'm going to let Dr. Santiago answer that, but that was asked by a year and a half ago, and someone said, no, we need, for what we do at Kemptville, CT is where we need to go. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't sort of grade them in terms of Cadillac versus non-Cadillac. It's more the modality that is good for the most things. Let's put it that way. So MRIs are good for looking at soft tissue. They're not really that good at looking at blood. They're not really that good at looking at bone. They're not really that good when it comes to certain type of cancer. So I would say the CT scan is a much more valuable tool if you're going to get a tool than an MRI in terms of the scope of what you can diagnose.
Okay, thank you. So it's more, CT's more well-rounded to do what you guys need to be done. Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. And Frank, when do you think, if all the funding falls into place, when do you think this is going to be operational? What's your thought on this or plan?
It's a great question. If you look at what's happening now, let's say we're fortunate to get the green light on at least the approval of funding at both levels of government. By the time we re-engage with our structural engineers, our architects, and wait for the cost of building materials to drop, I would venture a guess that it would be about 15 months from today that I can see a shovel in the ground and a pitcher at the earliest, once we get all of our ducks in a row. Because you just don't want to start putting shovels in the ground for a pitcher without having that foundation built. So now, that's my best guess after speaking with some people at a high level, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. Also, the operational is a good question, because there's two components that need to be completed. It's the bricks and mortar. We believe we can get the space built relatively quickly. We're not sure of the fundraising efforts of the foundation. We're grateful that they've agreed to organize the capital campaign. We're not sure how long that's going to take before we get the money to. Now, we might have to finance some of it in the meantime, but we're not sure when that's going to be completed. But I wouldn't expect to shovel in the ground for 15 months. That's my estimate.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for bringing this to us. And I mean, doing it in council here, at least we got some awareness for the public, and they know why we're doing it, why we may have to, put out some dollars locally here, and where it's going. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, so robust discussion. Glad all of council was able to engage, and to be clear that we haven't certainly secured the contribution from the United Counties. It's a proposed 50-50 split in your slide, and we look forward to having a discussion at the United Counties table. And I think Frank, in the coming weeks, and what I take away from this discussion, and I've had many discussions in the lead up to this one, of course, is that the investment in a CT scanner certainly is beneficial to North Grenville, but more significantly, it's beneficial to the region in terms of the expectations people can have for the kind of care. It's very beneficial to the paramedic community, and certainly the paramedics out of the United Counties, where we're already dealing with some significant delays and being able to respond to calls, as well as it relieves pressure on other hospitals where there are significant backlogs in terms of access to CT scans. So I'm a strong supporter. Obviously, I believe that Kenville District Hospital needs to evolve, that it wants to evolve, that you want to continue to attract a very talented team, array of physicians, surgeons, nurses, etc., radiologists, and to not go down this road, in my view, would be perilous. So from that perspective, I think we're very pleased that you're here tonight, that you've been able to crystallize a proposal, and that, of course, the next step will be going to the United Counties and continuing your discussion with the province, which is equally critical. And I would only ask that I know your conversations with MPP Steve Clark are ongoing, and that from your perspective, the province views this proposal favorably. Is that overstating the case in 10 seconds?
Yeah, no, you're bang on. That's a signal I received from both the Ministry of Health, Ontario Health East Region, and Minister Steve Clark. Yes, you're correct.
Good. Okay. So to that end, we do have a motion this evening to receive the presentation from KDH in regards to the CT scan and approve the request of KDH to contribute up to 50% of the cost to expand the facilities at KDH to accommodate a CT scanner to a maximum of $900,000 payable over a period of 10 years. Anyone wish to move that? Councillor Strachan? Seconder, Councillor Sullivan, thank you. Any questions in regards to the motion?
Yeah, sorry, could you repeat that motion? We're not approving the dollars, we're approving the presentation, the
Receive
report?
the presentation and approve the request of KDH to contribute up to 50% of the cost to expand the facilities for the CT scanner to a maximum of $900,000. And I understand, yes. Over a period of 10 years is in the motion, and I understand that our contribution would begin. Mr. Dyke, do you have that information? When our contribution would begin at the municipal level?
It'd be commenced in 2023.
Okay, 2023. Okay, good. And that is to clue up an existing 10-year commitment.
It allows us, by doing that, it allows us to not to use existing money within the budget.
Okay.
To moving forward.
Okay, Okay, good. So then I have a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillors Strachian and O'Sullivan, and I will call a question. All in favor? Good. Thank you. And of course, Councillor Barkley isn't with us this evening. He isn't feeling well, but I believe he would be equally supportive if he was here. Not to speak on his behalf. Thank you for coming. Thank you for bringing your son, and we look forward to future conversations. He's still awake? He's still with you? Okay. All right. Yeah. He was incredibly patient, so I salute him. I can't say that my kids would have sat through an hour, so I salute him. And your parenting, of course. Okay. So we'll move on to our next presentation. I'm just going to refer back to the agenda. Forgive me, and thank you both, and hope you travel well this evening. We do have one item listed under the consent agenda, and that's the council meeting minutes from October 19th. So I will look to a mover and a seconder for the consent agenda, for which there was just one item. Deputy Mayor, thank you. Over here, thank you, Councillor Sullivan. And that is to approve the singular item under the consent agenda. I'll call the question. All in favor, please. Good, thank you. So with that, we're moving on. And tonight's agenda does not have any reports under the Office of the CEO, Finance, or the Clerk. So it gives us pleasure this evening to welcome Ms. Amy Martin, and she's going to speak about the implementation plan and development strategy for housing and affordable housing in North Grenville. So thank you, Ms. Martin, for being here.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just wait for the presentation to be called up on the screen. While we wait, so I've structured the presentation into two portions. The first portion will speak to what are current policies on affordable housing. There's been a lot of discussion around the council table over the last few months as to what is our existing policy and how do we currently address affordable housing. I'll move into then our implementation of the strategy and ending with a conversation over the affordable housing policy, which it comes out of the recommendations from the strategy. So affordable housing is how we've defined it, and I'd like to recognize the work of the Mayor's Task Force as being the catalyst for starting off this process. And the strategy itself that we're discussing tonight and the implementation of builds off of the 18 recommendations that came out of the task force report to council back on March 10th of 2020, which feels like a long time ago. The way that we define affordable housing ownership and affordable rentals, and I won't read through the definitions tonight, but they are there on the screen, is derived from the provincial policy statement. This is the same definition that the task force adopted, and it is the same definition within our official plan. So again, it uses that, there's certain thresholds as to how we would calculate affordable housing, one for affordable ownership and one for affordable rent. So our official plan contains multiple policies as it pertains to the creation of affordable housing. Our settlement areas are encouraged to be a mix of housing opportunities, and it includes affordable housing, and that we will use our settlement areas as the center for residential commerce and our services within North Grenville. As for our growth management policies, our official plan recognizes the need to increase our supply of affordable housing, and the majority of new developments are encouraged to provide a mix of housing types and tenures to diversify the housing stock, including innovative proposals that provide affordable housing. So again, trying to move away from that concept of the traditional single detached dwelling and moving more towards multi-residential uses, townhouses, more entry-level housing that people might find attainable compared to that single detached dwelling. We have policies in our official plan in regard to density and form, and we do encourage the conversion of single detached dwellings into multiple dwelling units. So there'll be more discussion later on about additional residential units and policies around that. The official plan further provides policies for the criteria for residential conversion. So again, just speaking to how we can do it appropriately to reduce our impact on existing neighborhoods. We have an entire section within the official plan dedicated to housing, of which affordable housing is a component. The official plan recognizes that we need to create a municipal housing statement and an affordable housing strategy. So we've completed the latter, and we are in the process of creating a housing strategy right now that was awarded by council earlier this year. As for the housing policies in section 11 of the official plan, there's some general themes that arise from the policy. I would be here all night if I were to read it verbatim, but to save everyone, I have just categorized them. So creating opportunities for affordable housing, working with our upper levels of government, promoting residential intensification, encouraging innovation, and prioritizing affordable housing projects. So a lot of these themes that currently exist within our official plan were captured within the task force recommendation and within the affordable housing strategy. And as you will see later in the presentation, some of these come to light and there's more of a focus on actually implementing our policies. The next policy is very important because this is the target that we currently have within our official plan. So when it comes to affordable housing, the municipality shall attempt to have 25% of all new residential construction affordable. In a given year, the residential development may meet or exceed or fall short of that 25% target, so there's a 3-year average that's applied. Historically, the municipality has not done a great job in tracking the affordable housing numbers, although that is changing under the current regime within the planning department to do a better job of actually collecting the data as we have projects come in and capturing those values. And again, that will be addressed as part of the implementation strategy. Furthermore, our policy does allow for us to establish additional targets and further refine those targets outside of amending the official plan. So we do have the ability to create additional affordable housing objectives outside of our OP that we can implement. And the strategy implementation and more so the creation of an affordable housing policy will speak to this policy specifically. The official plan also identifies our measures to increase our supply of affordable housing, such as identifying areas for intensification and infill. So we typically encourage that within our urban areas. Provide density bonusing where appropriate, financial relief programs, prioritizing affordable housing projects, and evaluation of municipal lands. So we're starting to see some recurring themes within our policy. We also have provisions for how monitoring is to take place for affordable housing. So again, we do allow for the creation of more policies outside of the official plan. So one of the policy provisions is that we shall undertake an assessment report to assess our residential land supply, evaluate our housing conditions, the supply of affordable housing, analyze development trends and densities, and other housing supply and demand factors to assess the demand for affordable housing. So staff, as part of the budget process this year, given the fact that we'll have new census data available to us, we'll be undertaking a population study, but as well as, if approved by council, but as well looking at our land supply to see what is our current land supply for our projected 20 to 25 year housing demand, and affordable housing will be an important component of that process. There's a list here, and I won't go over them all because there's a variety of criteria as to what we should be monitoring. But as mentioned, historically, this data hasn't been collected, although we are making efforts to start collecting this information as part of an overall monitoring plan. Development requirements. We are permitted under our official plan to ask for an affordable housing report as part of submission requirements for development. So this is something more recently that staff have been very adamant about when we pre-consult on development applications for larger residential developments. And then density bonusing is our other tool. So we are permitted, as per the official plan, where densities are over 45 units per hectare, but under 60 units per hectare, to require in exchange for an increase in density, affordable housing. So there are a variety of criteria, and affordable housing is the first criteria. And most recently, we've utilized density bonusing on 2 residential apartment applications. So as for what tools staff have, we've really utilized the density bonusing provisions in regard to higher density development and the requirement for an affordable housing report for all new development that's coming through the door. So that expectation is set with the developers that this is a requirement. You're going to have to address affordable housing as part of your residential developments. So moving into the implementation strategy, what staff did is we went through the 31 recommendations from the strategy prepared by Dylan and created themes. We felt this was a better way of representing how we can achieve some of the recommendations without actually going through each 31 line by line. So you'll see here that we've broken it down by different categories. I'm going to address the creation of an affordable housing policy last. It is projected that we'd look for a timeline of completing that by the end of next year. We'd be creating a better monitoring program. That would be an ongoing process. Monitoring should always be ongoing. Official plan and zoning bylaw updates. Again, this is something that was identified even by the task force as a relatively easy feat to achieve. So we're looking at bringing policies before council at our December planning meeting. A review of our highway commercial lands over the next 2 years. Additional residential units by the end of this year. Identifying affordable housing opportunities, and I'm going to go into a little more detail on each of these, would be ongoing, as well as identifying funding and grant opportunities, establish an affordable housing advisory committee, and then creating supportive materials, guides, and checklists for affordable housing projects. So one of the needs that we've identified is just the need for better monitoring. So we internally in the planning and building division have been looking at how can we improve the quality of the data that we are collecting. And that matters when it comes to determining, are we achieving our goals? This includes the ongoing monitoring of building permit activity. We are moving towards an online software so we can get better reporting out of our building permits. And part of this process would be an annual report to council on how affordable housing targets are being achieved. And that's something that hasn't happened before, and I think would be of a great benefit because then it gives council a gauge as to where we're at. And then working with MPAC and the United Counties to monitor affordable housing creation. We're working on strengthening our relationship, so the information exchange between MPAC and the municipality it can help assist in how we analyze data. But as well, the United Counties also has their own affordable housing task force that's ongoing with the recommendation that they provide, they create their own metrics as to how we monitor. So the municipality needs to be heavily involved in that process to ensure that our interests are aligning as to how we monitor for affordable housing. As mentioned, updating our official plan and zoning bylaw were identified as a low-hanging fruit, as something that's easily achievable. So the recommendations, and this was also echoed in the task force recommendations, would be simple housekeeping amendments to eliminate minimum dwelling unit area, amending our ROP to strengthen our target to be 25% of all development to be made affordable, not shall attempt to have 25%. I think strengthening that policy is a requirement. Again, addressing housing typologies, ensuring that we're encouraging more diversity when it comes to our housing stock, and then adding affordable housing opportunities as part of a community improvement plan area. So another, again, low-hanging fruit policy creation. Reviewing our highway commercial lands was another recommendation, and it encompasses many policies. This would be to look at creating policy where we would allow for mixed-use development, so permitting higher residential uses within the highway commercial lands where they are appropriate, as well as doing a land use analysis and a vacant land analysis to identify opportunities where we could support higher residential development on the fringes of our highway commercial lands. And again, this would also require us to review our minimum density requirements. Additional residential units, this has come before council already through OPA number 5. Staff are working on the implementing zoning bylaw amendment for the end of this year, and the counties are also working on updating their language within their official plan, and it is my understanding that that will come before county council in December as well, so we're on track for everything to align with the counties very shortly. Again, identifying affordable housing opportunities would be ongoing. So this more speaks to a continual analysis of municipal lands to see where there might be opportunity for an affordable housing project. And this also encourages us to explore relationships with our post-secondary institutions to develop innovative housing typologies. So that's something that with the building division, we've discussed how could our post-secondary institutions support us when it comes to providing concepts for things such as, an accessory dwelling unit within an accessory structure, and providing some concepts that could help your average citizen achieve creating an additional dwelling unit within their home. exploring and establishing funding and grant opportunities. So this speaks to creating a list that's broader, looking at federal and provincial funding. But it also focused on the community improvement plan piece, where we could create a specific community improvement plan that speaks to affordable housing. As part of our 2022 budget process, staff are going to be recommending some funds within the budget to establish an affordable housing CIP, and this would allow us to tie agreements to ensure the long-term maintenance of a unit as affordable. The establishment of an affordable housing advisory committee, this would be a committee of council. So right now, staff currently leverage the community expertise from members of the Mayor's Task Force. It is anticipated that we would still leverage their expertise and knowledge until an advisory committee could be established. Just given the relative term of council and the upcoming election in 2022, it is anticipated that this would come back before council in 2023 for establishment. A terms of reference would be required to be established for the committee. And the committee's responsibility would be to reviewing our housing policies, assessing how we're doing. So the annual monitoring reports would go to the committee as well. And they would make recommendations to council on any changes to affordable housing policies. The strategy recommended that in the absence of an affordable housing advisory committee, that this role would be fulfilled by staff until such a time that one could be brought together. The creation of supportive materials, guidelines, and checklists. This is an ongoing item that staff will be undertaking, and it's just providing more information to the development community on how they can support affordable housing, but just making it that much more smoother of a process when an individual is going through a project that will create affordable housing. The other piece to this is developing a strategy on community outreach to help break down some of the stigmas around affordable housing projects. So staff will be looking at a way as to when a project comes forward within the community, how do we work with the developer and the local community to break down some of those common perceptions and misinformation around a project. And the last piece, and the largest item coming out of the affordable housing strategy, a lot of the recommendations lend themselves to the creation of an affordable housing policy. So the affordable housing policy would build on the work of the Mayor's Task Force and support the vision that was created for affordable housing in North Grenville, and the document itself would entrench that vision. It would further establish goals, objectives, and tangible targets to measure the success of affordable housing creation. So that would just be going beyond that 25% target and establishing more, for example, you could say the municipality would like to see the creation of 300 additional residential units over the next 10 years. And it would just give staff another metric as to which we can measure against to see, are we successful in creating more housing opportunity. And it also sets out the expectation for new residential development. So to undertake this process, staff are recommending that we go through a stakeholder session consultation, more so with our development community, as well as our housing agencies and supportive agencies. These are the two individuals or two groups, that we would engage with more so when it comes to the creation of affordable housing. And at the end, the general community would be brought in on the policy. They'd have, just through our regular channels of how we bring reports to council and present information, be able to comment on our policy creation. And we saw it as important to engage our stakeholders because we need their assistance in helping define, how can we achieve the creation of more affordable housing units? But more specifically, we need made in North Grenville policies that address the realities of our community. And as I mentioned, establishing targets and measurable goals will assist in how we monitor the creation of affordable housing units. And it also starts to establish that terms of reference and the goals that an advisory committee, when put together, would be able to achieve as part of the review of our policy. And it's important that you have a regular review of any planning, any policy, to ensure that you're addressing the dynamics within the community. And as such as affordable housing and the housing situation, it's evolving, a day-to-day, year-to-year. So being able to address the changing needs of the community is important, and having an advisory committee to do so would allow for us to better react to the conditions within the housing market. So it was a lot of information all at once. I tried not to breeze too quickly through it, but I know that this has been a long time coming, getting this before council. And at this time, I will take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Amy. Certainly, after getting elected, we very quickly convened the mayor's Affordable Housing Task Force, and I know it's been an evolution within the municipality in terms of effort, focus, capacity, and I think tools. So certainly from my perspective, the closer we get to crystallizing policies and updating some of our own zoning bylaws and I guess official planning provisions to allow for more flexibility and more options, and to reduce some of the barriers that certainly we've heard from developers, like that minimum square footage, right? You have to build a minimum of 700 square feet, right? Or we can't appropriately accommodate the accessory or additional units, right, within a home's, what, once known as secondary dwelling units. What are they called now? What did you refer them?
Additional residential
Thank
units.
you. So additional residential units where the province has been very clear that they want municipalities to do it, but we depend on municipality and county regulatory frameworks to make it possible. So from my perspective, getting that low-hanging fruit out of the way will help to, I think, streamline, create efficiencies, and help those who are building, whether they're individual homeowners or subdivision developers, certainly understand what we need and how we get there. So I know there's been many different conversations from the task force to the Dillon strategy, and now I understand what is a municipally led kind of framework to bring it all together. So I want to thank you because I know it's been a ton of work to, I think, crystallize it and identify the different thematics and levers and tools. And I was assured in hearing that you'll be bringing back some of the zoning bylaw amendments and official planning amendments to council in December to help kind of, I think, catalyze, I think, some of the efforts that we're already undertaking. Council colleagues, other questions in terms of where Ms. Martin is right now? Feeling good? From your perspective, Ms. Martin, when we look at collaboration with the counties, you rightly named the task force, the housing task force that I chair at the counties at the political table, which has also, I think, created an opportunity for staff to look much more strategically at the long-term vision for housing within the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville. Do you see other opportunities for collaboration in the long term? Certainly I know that being chair of the task force and Mayor Todd is vice chair, we've had lots of conversations about how you balance high growth areas with low growth areas, and how do you ensure that affordable housing is, if not equally distributed, at least available and accessible across the region. There's been some suggestion that high growth areas can leverage that in a way that lower growth areas can't, and I don't know if you see other longer term opportunities for collaboration with the counties in the future.
I think there definitely is a role for that long-term collaboration, and at our most recent planners meeting at the counties 2 weeks ago, Ms. Mills raised that the recommendations within the task force at the county level had a number of policy implications for the county official plan that she will be seeking municipal input on, and I think that's very important to be at that table to provide that input, because our reality in some ways is a lot different than the reality that you might have in Front of Yonge, which is quite a much smaller municipality that doesn't have the high growth that we're experiencing. I think having that collaboration ensures that there's a balanced policy put in place and policies that will help support North Grenville. And I think being at that table is critical and key. But as well as working with the housing services as well when they for funding opportunities. You know, the recent announcement of the $1.1 million that they're looking to invest in North Grenville, I think there's a huge role to play, just in general of, you know, when opportunities come up, working to identify appropriate locations or, you know, answers to what they're looking for, and ensuring that we're on their radar as to creating, whether it's affordable housing or supportive housing units, is important.
Just one quick follow-up. In terms of highway commercial designation policies within the official plan, I think specifically we're talking about County Road 43. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. That's where our concentration of highway commercial lands are. I would like just to note that it does not include the lands along County Road 19 or Colonnade. Those are our employment lands. But I know that they often get grouped into that Highway 43 corridor.
And given forthcoming expansion improvements to County Road 43, where do you anticipate the timing of a potential redesignation, right, for mixed-use lands? Because obviously we've done it with Kevlar, right? Kevlar sought an official planning amendment to build both residentially and commercially. What's your sense of timing? I saw that you said 22, 23, 24, but do you see this piece moving more quickly just because of possible opportunities? I don't know what they are, as you know, County Road 43 improves as, you know, an area that will have multi-use pathways, right? And other accommodations, I think, that are more appropriate for residential.
From a policy perspective, it would, you know, we do anticipate that we would look at 2022 at some point bringing forward an official plan amendment. There were two aspects to the highway commercial piece, and one was a land use analysis, like a vacant land use parcel analysis. That takes a lot more, you know, more detail and more thought to be put into it. But from a policy perspective, it's something that we could, within the first half of the year, have an official plan amendment before council for consideration. Just want to do some more research to ensure that we get it right, and to you know, part of the process is analyzing what other municipalities have within their official plan and policies, and find something that works for us. There is opportunity, especially on our, I want to call it the fringe areas, where you start to see that transition towards the residential areas, to have that transition from commercial to a higher density residential to a medium density down to your lower density.
Colleagues, anything else? I can't see everyone. Okay, Councillor Strakian?
I would just like to say I appreciate getting this very detailed presentation. I think I'll have to reread it a few times to actually fully absorb it all. There's a lot of information in there, but you're right, we were eagerly awaiting this report and having all this information in front of us. I note your point that you make about being prepared to be able to take advantage of opportunities and to be able to be proactive, because we're prepared, already thinking about this, about how we can implement, how we can bring this forward, and being at that table. So I think there's no doubt in my mind that Mayor Peckford at the table, as well as working with staff here, has given us a big, I guess, a lead on perhaps other municipalities, because we are already thinking about this. So being ahead of the game, ahead of the ball, so to speak. So I appreciate that. I don't have any other questions. Like I said, there's a lot of information in there, so maybe some will come to my mind later, but I appreciate everything you put up there, and I don't have any issue with anything that was put up there. Nothing stood out. So as far as that goes, thank you very much.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Director Merton, question for you. We've got this wonderful plan that you're working on getting this done, and thank you for doing this. It's a lot of work, we know. And I've been in and out of this probably for a little while with you and through the task force as well. You are also working on, your department's working on a design plan for, you know, building in the community. How would you see these two meshing together in any way? What trumps what? How would it fit into the design plan when you finish that?
The design guidelines would be meant to provide just general guidance for site plan creation. So in certain circumstances, you might have an affordable housing project that multi-residential might be the best example. So the design guidelines would provide guidance on, you know, how best to site the site, what amenities you should provide, how to create that that connectivity with the neighborhood, which is important, and that's something that we've heard around the council table. At the end of the day, they are design guidelines. We definitely are open to creative solutions where, especially for affordable housing projects, where there might be a different design element that's brought forward to, whether it's to help increase the number of units on a property and reduce some standards. It's something that we could take into consideration. But the design guidelines itself provides us with that framework in which we can work within when it comes to site development. But in regards to affordable housing, there is room for creativity in the process, because we want to ensure that we are maximizing opportunities to support affordable housing.
Just one more question, comment from me, and I know municipal staff will be undertaking stakeholder sessions, and very valuable, no doubt. Development community, I've been part of so many discussions with various developers on how they see a vision for affordable housing or incorporating an affordable housing element into their plans, and those conversations are always, I think, interesting and revealing and give us some new ideas in certain cases. And housing agencies and supportive organizations 100%, and obviously some of the work we're now doing with the counties with the supportive housing units funding that we received is all about, right, collaboration and synergies. In terms of the general community, certainly the Affordable Housing Task Force consulted, heavily engaged with various members of the community in a general sense, and obviously it's not to say that they wouldn't want to go back at it again, but I just want to be clear that I think Council, through the unanimous adoption of the task force recommendations, which kind of articulated a vision, certainly did that with good support from the community. And while absolutely it's always helpful to go back, I think you've got certainly, I think we as council and representatives of the community feel fairly well grounded in what the community needs. Not to say that some specific consultations may not be worthwhile. I think they're always worthwhile, but I think there's again, I say it often, I mean, housing and broadband every week, multiple calls from people who are in distress, people who are looking in distress because they're losing housing, people who actually want to create housing opportunities and don't quite know how to get there, and some of them are well equipped and some of them are less, but nonetheless, I think there's a lot of energy in the community to go down this path, so hopefully consolidating the vision and having those tools sooner rather than later will allow us to benefit from some of that, I think, goodwill and momentum. Good. I don't see anything else from council colleagues. Anything else you want to say before you wrap?
No, not at this time, and just staff are working hard to address the items that we can in a timely manner, and we do recognize the need to provide better clarity and a clear mandate when it comes to what we expect out of development moving forward.
And if I'm not mistaken, I have said this, so maybe you clarify because you deal with other municipalities. We are clearly leaders in Eastern Ontario for the depth and sustained focus on this file. I don't believe the City of Ottawa has a 25% affordable housing imperative, do they, to your knowledge?
So the 25% is, and from my experience in other municipalities, is something that the province likes to see within official plans as to how it's further defined. I'm not certain. I would have to review Ottawa's official plan to see what their target is. 25% would seem pretty standard, just because I know that's what the ministry has required in more recent official plan updates in other areas that I've been involved in.
Okay, so we'll have to look into that. Watching some of the conversation on Twitter in terms of City of Ottawa and affordable housing made me curious about how focused they are on that, but we can do some more research. All right, with that in mind, I think we're just looking, not just, but we have a motion here that Council receives the report titled Updated Affordable Housing Strategies for Information Purposes and approve the development strategy for the creation of an affordable housing policy. Who would like to move that? Deputy Mayor, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Strachan. And I don't see further comments, so I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good. And thank you. I know this is a consuming file, so we appreciate your tenacity and efforts to bring us closer. Okay, so that concludes the substantive business this evening. So I will look for the confirmation bylaw, and that is, I need a mover to confirm the proceedings of council at its regular meeting held on November 2nd. But before I do that, Ms. Babcock-Cormier reminds me that, of course, we always welcome questions from members of our community and members of the media. And to that end, Ms. Babcock-Cormier, are there any that you've received?
I haven't received any questions via email from the public or from the media. We do have 2 members of the public in attendance this evening.
Welcome back. We know these are regular observers of our council meetings, and it's great to see you back in person. So thank you for coming. We appreciate your interest. So with that in mind, I'll look for a mover and a seconder for our confirmation bylaw. Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Councillor O'Sullivan. I'll call the question. All in favor? Good. Thank you. And then we will just move to adjourn. So perhaps Councillor Strakian and Councillor O'Sullivan, you'd like to move and second adjournment of the meeting at 8:06 p.m. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.